My name is Michael Madsen. I'm 38 years old and I work as a sales manager at a used car dealership in Barstow, California. You know that routine everyone calls normal. Wake up early, silent breakfast, work all day selling cars to people who can barely afford them, come home and pretend everything is fine. My wife Jennifer always referred to me as responsible and dependable. But the way she said those words, it sounded like a death sentence. There was something in her tone that made me realize that to her I was just safe, never special. Every Friday night I had a ritual I considered sacred, watching old films in my small basement home theater, mostly classics from the 40s and 50s, Casablanca, Citizen Kane, Sunset Boulevard. To me that was like a window into a time when cinema had soul, when every frame was crafted with respect. But to Jennifer, and especially to my mother-in-law, Helen, it was just another proof that I lived stuck in the past. They always made a point of commenting whenever I went downstairs. There goes Michael, escaping reality again. What bothered me most wasn't the direct comments, but the way they looked at me. You know that look someone gives you as if you're an unfinished project? Jennifer had that look when I talked about filming techniques or how drive-in theaters were important to American culture. She would sigh, shake her head, and change the topic, always to something more practical like bills to pay or home renovations. It was as if my passion for film was a teenage phase I should have outgrown years ago. Family meals were especially tense when my hobbies, as they called them, came up. Helen would find a way to mention her friends' children, the lawyer, the doctor, the successful entrepreneur. Never directly, but the message was clear. Why can't you be like them? I swallowed hard and kept eating. But inside I felt myself shrinking with each comment. Jennifer never defended me. She just agreed with her mother, saying I could focus more on important things. One night in particular marked me deeply. I was explaining to Jennifer how drive-in theaters were true temples of American pop culture, where whole families gathered to watch films under the stars. She interrupted me mid-sentence and said, "Michael, you're almost 40. Don't you think it's time to stop dreaming about this and focus on what really matters?" In that moment, something inside me cracked. It wasn't anger. It was a profound sadness, as if she had just told me that my soul didn't matter. Work wasn't exactly a refuge either. My boss, Raymond, would make jokes about my obsession with old movies in front of the other sales staff. He thought it was funny to call me Hollywood whenever I walked into the office, as if it were an affectionate nickname. But I knew it wasn't. It was a reminder that I didn't fit in there, that my passion was seen as quirky and unproductive. The other salespeople laughed along, and I smiled back. But inside I felt like an actor playing a role I hated. On weekends, when Jennifer went out with her friends, I'd drive along the deserted roads around Barstow, imagining how that region looked in the 50s and 60s. I'd pass empty lots and sometimes glimpse the remains of old structures, abandoned gas stations, faded signs, foundations of buildings that were once important. There was something in those ruins that spoke to me louder than any conversation at home. It was like they held memories of a time when things were made with more care and respect. But here's what no one understood. I wasn't running from reality. I was trying to find a version of it that made sense to me. Every time I watched a classic film or drove those empty roads, I felt there was something bigger waiting for me. Something beyond selling used cars and pretending I was content with a life that didn't belong to me. Jennifer and Helen thought I was a lost dreamer, but I knew I was just waiting for the right moment. I just didn't imagine that moment was closer than I thought. It was a Tuesday in March when everything changed. I was browsing Craigslist during lunch, searching for vintage projection equipment, a habit Jennifer always criticized. That's when I saw the ad. Drive-in theater, unique opportunity, $85,000. The photo showed a large plot of land with a giant screen in the background, slightly faded but still imposing. My heart raced like it hadn't in years. It felt like I'd found something I didn't even know I was looking for. I read the listing 3 times before jotting down the seller's number. I called right away, pretending it was just curiosity. The owner, a man named George, explained that the drive-in had operated from the 1950s until 1987, when it finally closed due to lack of business. He said the land was nearly 15 acres, including the original screen, the concession building, and even some projection equipment stored in a shed. The price was exactly what I had in savings. Years of Jennifer and I putting money away for an emergency or to renovate the house. As he spoke, I felt energy rising in my chest, like my whole life had been a rehearsal for this moment. That night, I came home with a printed brochure and calculator in hand. Jennifer was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and I could barely contain my excitement. I showed her the drive-in photos, explained the opportunity, talked about how we could turn it into a source of income and an incredible cultural project. She looked at me with that expression I knew so well, a mixture of fatigue and disappointment. Before I finished speaking, she shook her head and said, "Michael, you can't be serious. This is complete lunacy." The conversation lasted all evening. Jennifer called her mother, and Helen came over for a family meeting. They sat on the couch, arms crossed, while I tried to explain my vision. Helen was blunt. "Michael, you're 38 and want to gamble all your savings on an abandoned plot in the middle of nowhere. This isn't a dream, it's a dangerous fantasy." Jennifer agreed, saying that I was running away from responsibility and that this was another one of my childish obsessions. They spoke about financial security, future plans, how I needed to grow up once and for all. I spent 3 weeks trying to convince them. I created spreadsheets, researched the nostalgic entertainment market, even found examples of other drive-ins that had been successfully restored. But each argument of mine was more forcefully countered. Jennifer even hid my credit card and began monitoring our bank account. She said she was protecting me from myself, and that it proved I wasn't capable of making important decisions. The betrayal didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came with silent control that made me realize my own family didn't trust me. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. One Thursday morning, while Jennifer was at work, I withdrew the money from savings and drove to George's office. My hands trembled when I signed the purchase contract. Not from fear, but from a euphoria I had never felt before. For the first time in my life, I was doing something I truly wanted, regardless of anyone's approval. George handed me the keys and a map of the land, and I knew there was no turning back. When Jennifer came home and saw the papers on the kitchen table, she stood silent for nearly 5 minutes. Then came the shouting, the crying, the frantic call to Helen. They called me irresponsible and selfish and completely crazy. Jennifer said I had betrayed her trust and that this was the end of everything. I heard every word without reacting, because I finally understood that no matter what I did, nothing would ever be enough for them. That night, Jennifer slept in the guest room and I stayed on the couch, staring at the keys to my drive-in. The next day, I packed a bag with essentials and left home. There was no dramatic farewell, no final argument. Jennifer was at work and I left a note on the kitchen table. "I'm going to take care of what's mine now. You always knew where to find me." I drove to the land for the first time as its owner, with a mix of terror and freedom running through my veins. When I stopped at the entrance and saw that giant screen waiting for me, I knew I had made the right choice. For the first time in 38 years, I was exactly where I needed to be. The first thing I did when I arrived at the drive-in was walk the entire property, alone and in silence. It was early April, and the California desert sun pressed warmly against my back as I inspected every detail of what was now mine. The giant screen had holes and stains but remained imposing, must have been about 50 feet high. The rusted speakers were still mounted on the poles like soldiers standing to attention after a lost war. I pulled out my phone and made a list in my notes. Screen structure, electrical system, concession building, projection equipment. It wasn't desperation. It was methodical. The small trailer office still had electricity, thank God. George had kept the basics running all those years, likely hoping someone like me would come along. Inside was a simple bed, a small bathroom, an old fridge, and a working stove. It wasn't luxury, but it was mine. That inaugural night, I sat on the trailer's porch with a beer in hand, gazing at the screen lit by moonlight, and felt a peace I hadn't experienced in decades. No one was telling me this was crazy. No disapproving looks, just me and my decision. Over those first few days, I simply observed and planned. I walked the grounds every morning, noting every issue and opportunity. The concession building was in deplorable condition, broken windows, leaks, old wiring. But the structure was sound and I could see the potential. There was a projection room upstairs George had mentioned, though I hadn't yet fully explored it. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed the creaky stairs, finding equipment draped in dusty sheets. Not just projectors, there were boxes, stacks of papers, even a few old posters stuck to the walls. My phone rang constantly. Jennifer, Helen, even Raymond from my old job. I let it ring. I wasn't avoiding consequences, I was choosing when and how to face them. After 3 days of persistent calls, I answered one from Jennifer. She cried, begged me to come home, said we could talk things out as adults. I listened in silence and replied, "Jen, I'm where I need to be. You always knew where to find me." Then I hung up and got back to work. It was no longer about proving anything to her. It was about proving to myself. I began researching online, restoring drive-ins, vintage projection equipment, the legal regulations for reopening a theater. I discovered I'd need licenses, insurance, safety approvals. Not impossible, but not simple either. Each bit of research gave me more confidence because every problem had a practical solution. I created spreadsheets, got quotes, even contacted suppliers. Finally, I was doing something that truly mattered to me, and every hour I logged felt worthwhile. Solitude didn't bother me. It strengthened me. I woke with the desert sunrise, made coffee on the old stove, and started the day knowing exactly what needed to be done. No more pretending, no more performing. I was Michael Madsen, owner of a drive-in, working to resurrect something the world had forgotten. Some nights I'd turn on the radio, listen to 1950s music, and organize tools or clean a corner of the building. It felt like preparing for something bigger, even if I didn't yet know what that was. A week after moving into the property, I made a crucial decision. I stopped answering calls from people who didn't support my choice. I blocked Helen's number, ignored Jennifer's texts, and even informed Raymond that I would not return to the dealership. It wasn't anger, it was focus. I had a mission now, and every minute spent justifying my choices was a minute stolen from my project. My energy was being channeled into something productive after years of waste. 2 weeks into living on the grounds, I finally felt ready to explore the projection room more thoroughly. There was something about that space calling to me, as if it held secrets waiting to be uncovered. I improved the lighting, brought in some tools, and began removing the sheets from the equipment. There were 35mm projectors, empty reels, even promotional movie posters from the 1960s. But when I started moving the heavy boxes in the corner of the room, I realized I might have discovered something far more important than I ever imagined. The boxes were heavier than they looked, and when I finally hefted them into the center of the projection room, I realized they weren't just old equipment stored away. Faded studio stamps, MGM, Paramount, RKO, were still visible on some. A few bore red confidential stickers, others labeled test print or archive copy. My heart started racing as I cracked open the first box and discovered perfectly sealed metal film cans, their handwritten labels faded with age. These weren't trash, they were hidden reels, film canisters forgotten by time. I handled one can reverently, like a sacred artifact. The label read, "The Lost Weekend, Alternative Ending, 1945, in elegant script." My mind went wild. The Lost Weekend had won Best Picture that year, but I'd never heard of an alternate ending. I opened more cans. Sunset Boulevard, Deleted Scenes, Citizen Kane, Extended Cut, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, Director's Notes. These titles were Hollywood gems, versions that shouldn't exist, certainly not abandoned in a remote California drive-in. I continued exploring with equal parts disbelief and joy. There were behind-the-scenes photos, production notes, even correspondence between directors and studio executives. One folder held negatives stamped "Prohibited, Do Not Distribute" from films I knew had been censored or never released. It was as if someone had created a secret archive of American film history, and then vanished. Who was George, really? How did a simple drive-in owner gain access to such sensitive studio material? The most astonishing find was in a small box tucked behind the others. Inside was a reel labeled Orson Welles, The Other Side of the Wind, Original Cut, 1970. I knew of Welles's decades-long struggle to complete that film. It had become cinema lore. The project was halted due to legal and financial issues and was thought never to have been finished. Yet here it was in my hands, what appeared to be the final version of cinema's most legendary lost film. In that moment, I understood this wasn't just movie memorabilia. It was a historical treasure of incalculable value. Each reel represented a missing piece of America's cultural mosaic, films that cinema scholars only dreamed of finding, versions that could rewrite how we interpret those classics. And inexplicably, they were here, hidden in a dusty projection room no one had explored for decades. My impulsive purchase had led me to something far greater. I spent the rest of the afternoon cataloging every item, photographing labels and notes. There were over 50 reels, some pristine, others in need of urgent restoration, spanning from the 1940s to the 1970s. Each new discovery raised more questions. Why hadn't George mentioned any of this? How did these reels end up here? And most importantly, who else knew? The realization was surreal, as though I'd stumbled into a decades-old cinematic conspiracy. These weren't just lost films. They were evidence of industry decisions, censorship, projects deliberately wiped from history. Every reel spoke of power, control, and the entertainment world's hidden depths. I held pieces of history intentionally erased from public record. As the sun set that evening, I sat surrounded by open boxes in the projection room, trying to grasp the magnitude of my discovery. It was no longer about restoring a drive-in. I had become the guardian of a film archive that could transform our understanding of American cinema's golden age. Jennifer and Helen had called me crazy for investing in an abandoned piece of land, but I had found something that could not only change my life, but reshape the world of film lovers forever. The question now was clear. What would I do with this responsibility? I spent 3 days researching before making any move. I couldn't just call someone and say, "I found lost Hollywood films," without sounding like a lunatic. I needed credibility, someone with genuine expertise in film preservation. I found Dr. David Chen, curator of the UCLA Film Archive, who had authored several papers on lost 1940s-50s films. I sent a carefully worded email, attaching photos of a few less sensitive labels, explaining my situation without revealing its full scope. 2 hours later, my phone rang. The voice on the other end trembled with excitement. "Mr. Madsen, I need to see this in person. Can I come by tomorrow?" Dr. Chen arrived the next morning in a dusty Toyota Prius, carrying a case of analysis equipment. He was an Asian-American man in his 50s, thick glasses, and the restrained energy of someone whose life's work was exactly what I had discovered by accident. When I showed him the projection room and he saw the first boxes, his immediate reaction was to tremble as he handled the Citizen Kane extended cut reel. He examined the cans with a loupe, checked authenticity seals, and after an hour of silent inspection, looked at me in total disbelief. "Michael, do you know what this means? Some of these films have been considered lost for decades." Validation came in waves. Dr. Chen contacted colleagues who contacted more experts and museum curators. Within 48 hours, my abandoned drive-in had become the epicenter of a quiet revolution in film preservation. The second person to arrive was Margaret Hoffman, from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in LA, an elegant 60-year-old woman who treated every reel like a Renaissance masterpiece. She confirmed the authenticity of many items and told me I was sitting on what could be the most important discovery in American film history in decades. The news leaked, of course, first to film blogs, then academic journals, and finally mainstream outlets. "Drive-in owner discovers lost Hollywood treasures," blared the LA Times. "Hidden film archive found in desert theater," read Variety. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, documentary filmmakers, producers, even major studio execs all wanted to explore possibilities. I answered each with, "I'm still evaluating how best to preserve and share this material with the public." What astonished me most was the reaction from the international film community. Directors I'd admired for decades reached out, offering restoration help. Film festivals across the globe wanted to host special screenings. The Sundance Film Festival invited me to give a talk on cinematic archaeological discoveries. Universities offered academic partnerships to study the material. Every call, every email, every proposal reaffirmed that my crazy idea had become one of the most respected and coveted cinematic finds. Then Hollywood executives showed up and things got even more intense. First a rep from Paramount, then someone from Warner Brothers, followed by a lawyer representing established industry interests. They came with contracts, offers involving millions in exchange for exclusive rights. One offered $5 million in cash for the archive. Another proposed establishing a foundation in my name, and they'd handle it all. These offers were tempting, but something in their tone, urgent and controlling, raised red flags. It felt less about preserving history and more about owning it. Pressure peaked when Jennifer showed up at the drive-in, the first time since I left home, accompanied by Helen and Albert, all dressed as if for a business meeting. Jennifer had seen the TV coverage and was here to offer support. Helen insisted I needed proper guidance for such a major discovery. Albert mentioned knowing lawyers in LA who could maximize the financial potential. It was the same family that had called me childish weeks ago, now rushing in to claim a piece of my visionary project. I listened calmly, sitting on the trailer's porch while they rattled off discussions about contracts, rights, and monetization. When they finished, I replied simply, "Thanks for coming. I did warn you. You always knew where to find me." Jennifer tried to persuade me. I was in over my head. I needed family wisdom. I looked at her, at Helen, at Albert, and felt a crystal-clear realization. This wasn't about money, recognition, or proving something to people who never believed in me. It was about justice, for the lost films, the forgotten artists, and the very history of cinema. In the days following my family's visit, their attempts to reconnect escalated in ways I never expected. Jennifer began appearing at the drive-in, casually, always with some excuse. She brought coffee, offered to help with correspondence, even suggested we might rethink our separation in light of the new circumstances. She spoke about how she had always admired my passion for cinema and might have been too hard on me in the past. It was astounding how the discovery of the films had magically transformed my childish obsession into artistic vision. I listened politely, offered cold water, and continued my work without committing to anything. Helen also changed her tone entirely. She called me almost daily with valuable suggestions on how to manage my new social position. She spoke about investments, how I could multiply this opportunity, and even mentioned knowing a real estate agent who could help me find a property more fitting to my current status. The irony was almost comical. The same woman who had called me a pathetic dreamer now wanted to be my financial advisor. Each call ended the same way. I thanked her for her concern and said I was carefully assessing all options. Hollywood executives didn't give up easily either. They came back with more aggressive offers, some reaching $8 million for the entire archive. A Disney representative brought a strategic partnership proposal that involved creating a theme park based on the discovery. Another group proposed turning my story into a film, with lifetime rights and profit share. Each proposal was more tempting than the last, but they all had one thing in common. They sought complete control over the material. It was as if they wanted to buy not just the films, but the narrative of the story itself. Social pressure also increased in unexpected ways. Former co-workers from the dealership began reaching out, wanting to catch up and offering help with important contacts. Raymond, my former boss who used to joke about my interest in cinema, showed up at the drive-in with a bottle of champagne and a proposal to co-invest in a film preservation venture. He spoke about how he had always recognized my potential and wanted to be part of my well-deserved success. I listened politely, but inside I felt a mix of pity and absolute clarity. Then came a call that changed everything. Dr. David Chen called me one Friday afternoon, his voice laden with concern. He had discovered that some of the executives contacting me didn't represent merely commercial interests. They belonged to a consortium historically responsible for hiding or destroying films deemed problematic for the industry's image. Some of the reels I'd found contained evidence of censorship, narrative manipulation, even suppression of works critical of the system. My discovery wasn't just culturally significant, it was politically dangerous for certain powerful players. In that moment, I understood that the pressure I was facing wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about control over historical narrative. The million-dollar offers, my family's rekindled interest, even certain academic partnerships, were all part of a coordinated strategy to wrest control of this material from my hands and return it to those who would decide what the public should know about the history of American cinema. It was a betrayal far greater than anything Jennifer or Helen had done. It was a betrayal of historical truth itself. The final decision came naturally, without drama or hesitation. I called Jennifer and said simply, "I'm not going to sell the archive. I'm establishing an independent preservation center right here." She tried to argue, saying I was wasting the opportunity of a lifetime and could secure our financial future forever. I replied, "Jen, my future was never for sale." I hung up and blocked her number. I did the same with Helen, Albert, and every executive who had approached me. It wasn't out of anger, it was out of respect. Respect for the filmmakers who created these works, for the archivists who preserved them, and for the history that deserved to be told without commercial filters. From that day forward, I stopped responding to calls from anyone seeking to profit from my find. I set up an automatic response to all commercial inquiries. This archive will be preserved and made available for academic research and cultural exhibitions. It is not for sale. Some people were outraged, others attempted legal pressure, but most simply vanished when they realized I wouldn't change my mind. The clarity was absolute. I was no longer Michael who needed anyone's approval. I was the guardian of something far greater than personal relationships or financial gain. 2 years later, the Madsen Film Preservation Center had quietly become a reference in the film world. What began as an abandoned drive-in now housed a climate-controlled screening room, a digital restoration lab, and a small library specializing in classic cinema. Every day, I woke up to the sound of the desert wind and knew exactly what my purpose was: to preserve stories that were nearly lost forever. The routine was simple: cataloging films in the morning, working on restorations in the afternoon, and sometimes screening rare finds for small groups of cinephiles who made pilgrimages to Barstow. It was a life that finally made sense. The center operated independently, funded by donations from universities and cultural institutions that understood the value of the work we were doing. Dr. David Chen had become a regular partner, visiting monthly to supervise new restoration projects. Margaret Hoffman brought a team from the Academy to digitize some of the most fragile reels, ensuring they would survive for future generations. There was no glamour in it, no spotlights or red carpets, just the quiet, essential work of keeping a vital part of American history alive. Exactly the kind of project my family once dismissed as unproductive. The discoveries kept coming. Other owners of old theaters began reaching out, sending boxes of materials they had found in attics and storage units. Each delivery felt like opening a time capsule: behind-the-scenes photos, correspondence between directors, even some negatives of films thought to be completely lost. I assembled a small team of volunteers, mostly film students who came to spend time at the center, learning preservation techniques while helping catalog the archive. It was deeply rewarding to see young people discovering the magic of classic cinema through hands-on work. The first public screening of Orson Welles' The Other Side of the Wind happened on a September night under the desert stars. We invited only 50 guests, critics, scholars, and a few cinephiles who had supported the project from the beginning. When the first images appeared on the restored drive-in screen, a reverent silence settled over the crowd and lasted the entire film. At the end, a young film student from USC came up to me with tears in her eyes and said, "Thank you for not selling this to Hollywood. Thank you for letting the art speak for itself." In that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. Recognition came in unexpected ways. I received a letter from the son of one of the directors whose films had been discovered in the archive, thanking me for preserving his father's legacy. The Sundance Film Festival invited me to a special retrospective of the hidden reels of Barstow, as they came to be known. Several universities offered partnerships to create academic programs based on the archive. But what touched me most were the messages from young filmmakers who said the discovery had inspired them to pursue their own passions, regardless of others' approval. It was as if history itself had created a cycle of inspiration. Jennifer tried to reach out a few times during the first year, always through third parties or indirect messages. I heard she had remarried, this time to a lawyer in Los Angeles introduced by Helen. Apparently, they found the financial and social stability she had always wanted. I felt no anger or nostalgia, just a quiet gratitude that we discovered our incompatibility before wasting more years trying to force something that would never work. Some people are made for safe paths. Others are made to forge new ones. There's no judgment in that, only an acknowledgement of fundamental differences. The drive-in also became a small cultural attraction in the region. Families would drive in from Los Angeles on weekends to watch classics under the stars, kids discovering the magic of outdoor cinema for the first time. We began offering film history workshops, always with a focus on preservation and respect for the art of filmmaking. It was incredible to see how the place had become a gathering spot for people who shared the same passion I'd carried for decades. What my family once called a retreat from reality had become a way to connect people with culture and history. One winter night, I was organizing some documents in the projection room when I found a letter that had arrived weeks earlier and I'd forgotten to open. It was from a young filmmaker in Ohio who had watched one of our online screenings during the pandemic. He wrote, "Mr. Madsen, your story taught me that sometimes we have to be brave enough to disappoint the right people in order not to disappoint ourselves. Thank you for showing that it's possible to build something meaningful out of what others see as madness." I carefully folded the letter and placed it in a special drawer. On days when the desert silence felt too loud, I'd reread messages like that and remember that something beautiful had come from all the pain I once endured. Looking back, I realized the real discovery wasn't Hollywood's lost films. It was discovering who I truly was when no one was watching. For years, I lived trying to be the version of myself others expected, selling used cars and pretending to be content with a life that wasn't mine. But sometimes life forces us to choose between other people's approval and our own soul. I chose my soul, and it led me to a treasure I didn't even know I was searching for. If you've made it this far, chances are you've either faced or are facing a similar situation. People who don't believe in your dreams, family who prefers your safe version over your authentic self. So I want to ask you, what's your abandoned drive-in? What's that one thing everyone calls crazy, but your heart races every time you think about it? Tell me in the comments. What's the project you'd pursue even if everyone said you were out of your mind? Sometimes one person's story is all it takes to inspire someone else to finally take the leap they've been putting off for years. And if you want to keep hearing stories of people who had the courage to disappoint others so they wouldn't disappoint themselves, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every week I bring real stories of people who bet on themselves, even when no one else would. Because at the end of the day, life's too short to live someone else's dream instead of your own.